There are stories that don't begin with love, but with ambition. In New York, where the lights never dim and dreams never rest, Savannah Cole was one among thousands of young women who believed if you weren't born into silk, you had to climb into it at any cost. She grew up in a small town in northern New Jersey. Her family lived, simply some would say barely. But even as a child, Savannah's eyes were always fixed on the roads where luxury cars glided past, where glass towers kissed the sunset, and where women in mink coats looked like they'd stepped out of the movies. She didn't want an ordinary life. And she didn't plan to climb the social ladder with degrees or diplomas, but with beauty charm and a fearless kind of cunning. At 21, she arrived in New York with 2 suitcases and one dream to become the woman of a wealthy man. 7 years later, Savannah had everything, or at least the illusion of it. She lived in a tiny rental in the Lower East Side, managed a boutique in Soho, and was a regular face at events where celebrities mingled. Not because she was invited, but because she knew how to slip her name onto the guest list. She dated powerful men, sometimes CEOs, sometimes investors, but most of them were men who spent money to curate an image. And Savannah. She knew how to become part of that image. Love. That wasn't her concern. To her, love was a luxury emotion. Savannah didn't believe in love without credit cards or diamond rings. She believed in numbers and in finding someone who could afford her forever. That Saturday afternoon began like any other. She had just stepped out of her favorite nail salon in Soho warm latte, in hand her waves styled to perfection, her lips the color of vintage Merlot. Her latest OOTD post on Instagram had already passed 1,000 likes. Everything was flawless until a young boy suddenly ran up to her. In his small hand was a sparkling pink plastic ring so cheap it almost made her frown. But it wasn't the ring that made Savannah freeze. It was his eyes, clear, innocent, and strangely sincere. A few casual words, a spark of curiosity, and one short text later, Savannah unexpectedly agreed to dinner with the boy's father. A stranger named Blake who chose the most luxurious rooftop restaurant in the city for their very first meeting. That evening, when Savannah stepped into the Monarch, a rooftop bar where a single cocktail could cost nearly a day's paycheck, she felt like she was stepping back into the dream that had once ignited her ambition. The decor was lavish, the lighting a soft golden hue, and jazz music floated gently through the air. There, already seated and composed, was Blake, dressed in a tailored suit exuding the kind of confidence that bordered on theatrical. He placed his wine glass down, rose to greet her with a politeness so perfectly performed it almost seemed rehearsed. But Savannah didn't mind. Appearance had always been the first thing she evaluated. They took their seats. Blake ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, imported oysters from the West Coast, and spoke like someone who had spent his life among the elite. Savannah listened, smiled at the right moments, nodded with practiced poise. Everything was unfolding exactly as she had imagined it, like the countless mental scripts she had rehearsed over the years. Until Blake stood up, patted his pockets, and casually mentioned he had left his wallet in the car. He'd be right back. But he didn't come back. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 30. A server approached the table with a polite reminder that the bill remained unpaid. A cold shiver ran down Savannah's spine. She searched her purse. All she had was her phone and a few stray coins. Eventually, she had no choice but to walk into the kitchen, not to find Blake, but to wash dishes to cover the debt. The designer dress she wore was now soaked and stained. Her eyes burned as tears welled up, not because she was humiliated, but because for the first time she truly understood what it felt like to be deceived without mercy. She had always believed she was the one in control of the game. But in truth, she was just a piece on someone else's board, and this time she had lost everything. The next morning, Savannah slipped out through the restaurant's back door. There was no red carpet, no camera flashes, no hollow compliments echoing in the air. Just silence. Her phone buzzed. One message. From an ex-boyfriend, the one she had left behind for a cosmetic surgeon with a summer house in the Hamptons. 3 words. Serves you right. Savannah turned off her phone. For the first time in years, she felt empty. No parties. No flattering invitations. She had turned herself into a spectacle, and the worst part was no one really cared. She thought of her mother, a simple woman who once taught her how to cook, who stitched her dresses by hand, who had once said gently, "Sweetheart, don't trade your heart just to buy yourself a temporary life." Savannah had never listened. Until now. But what Savannah didn't know was, that was only the beginning. Because fate, strangely enough, always seems to arrive just as a person falls apart. There was a man waiting for her, not with a luxury car, not with stock options, not with a rooftop restaurant, but with something she had never truly searched for, an unbroken heart. After that humiliating night at the restaurant, Savannah fell into a strange kind of silence. In the days that followed, she didn't post on Instagram, didn't attend any parties, and ignored every call. The city lights still glittered like always, but for her, it felt as though they'd all gone dark. She had spent her youth like a mountain climber, always scaling, always clawing upward, but this time she had nothing left to hold on to. A week later, Savannah found herself standing outside a small grocery store in Brooklyn, clutching a bag of discounted items, her eyes fixed on the worn-down heels of the shoes that once symbolized success. It wasn't just her wallet that felt empty. Her faith in life was, too. And then, she saw him. A man was pushing a wheelbarrow across the street. Inside were bundles of roses, bags of dark soil, and a few rusty gardening tools. He wore an old button-up shirt, sleeves rolled high, his skin tanned from the sun, his hands streaked with dirt. And he smiled, not the tight, performative smile of finance bros or influencers, but a real smile, the kind that didn't need a reason. Savannah didn't know why she stepped forward and asked, "Do you need help?" Maybe because deep down, she needed help too. His name was Elijah Carter, 32 years old. He worked as a freelance gardener in the upscale neighborhoods of Brooklyn Heights. He had no business cards, no website, no company name, only 2 capable hands, and a list of clients who always called him back because he had a way of reviving their gardens like magic. At the time, Elijah had agreed to tend a long-abandoned garden behind an old hotel. He worked from dawn to dusk, mostly unnoticed. But Savannah, someone who had walked past hundreds of perfectly curated urban gardens, was drawn to the way Elijah worked. He didn't just plant. He nurtured. Each leaf was adjusted with care. Each root tucked gently beneath soil with bare hands, as if gardening was his way of listening to the world. Savannah would sit on the wooden steps nearby, watching in silence. And for the first time, she realized the world didn't turn on guest lists, champagne parties, and high-end cars. It turned slowly, gently, and sometimes beautifully. After a few visits, Savannah started helping Elijah not for money, but because she needed to touch something real again. Even if it was just pulling weeds, watering rows, or planting a small lavender bush, she felt like something inside her was slowly being restored. Elijah never asked too many questions. He didn't care why a girl with designer perfume and salon-styled hair was sitting in the dirt with him. He simply handed her a second pair of gloves and said, "Doesn't matter who you were yesterday. Around here, every plant starts from dirt." One afternoon, the sky opened up. Rain came fast and cold. They ran for shelter beneath the tin awning of an old shed, soaked through and shivering. Neither of them said a word. But in that moment, for the first time, Savannah didn't feel empty. She looked at Elijah, his sun-worn face, his shirt clinging to his skin, his eyes still soft and steady. And she didn't think about diamond rings. She didn't think about Porsche keys. She thought about hands, and the quiet kind of patience it takes to grow something from nothing. After the rain, Elijah brought her back to his cabin. It was nothing more than a modest wooden home lined with bookshelves, a few potted plants on the windowsill, and a bed he had built himself. But it was the first place in years where Savannah fell asleep without a single restless dream. He cooked dinner using vegetables from his garden. She ate slowly, not because it was fancy, but because she didn't want to waste something so honest. In a room without Wi-Fi, without texts, pinging every 5 seconds for the first time in a long time, time itself stood still. Day by day, Savannah lived alongside Elijah not as lovers, but as two out-of-sync souls slowly learning to harmonize. She began to realize something profound: not all rich people were strong, and not all poor people were small. Elijah spoke of his mother, a Jamaican immigrant who had passed away from cancer when he was young, leaving him with his father, a lifelong gardener. He didn't inherit money. What he inherited were tools, shovels, spades, and a quiet reverence for every leaf that dared to grow through dry soil. My father used to say, if you treat the earth right, it'll thank you with flowers. Savannah didn't respond. But that night, lying in silence, she gently placed her hand over her chest, and for the first time in a very long time, she could feel her heart beating for something different. 1 week later, Elijah invited her to visit his father's home in the outskirts of Rhinebeck, a small town 3 hours outside the city. Savannah imagined a rustic old cabin, maybe a chicken or two roaming in the yard. But when the car stopped in front of a sprawling, park-sized property, she froze. Before her stood a vast flower farm, lovingly cared for, surrounded by maple trees and the soft trill of morning birds. The main house was made of oak with tall glass windows that looked out over a still quiet lake. She had never seen a place so beautiful, not urban, not glamorous, but the kind of beauty that calms the soul without asking permission. Elijah's father, Marcus, stepped out from the porch. He wore simple clothes, his silver hair catching the light, his eyes kind and steady. "You picked a good one," he told Elijah, glancing warmly at Savannah. She lowered her head. For the first time, she felt unworthy. That evening, they ate dinner at a long wooden table. No expensive wines, just homemade cider and dishes prepared with care. But the way Marcus gazed at the photo of his late wife with softness and gratitude taught Savannah something she had never understood in all her years of chasing love. Love wasn't about what you receive, it was about what you protect. Before bed, Marcus said softly, "If you want to be a queen, you must learn how to treat your husband like a king, even if he wears no crown." Savannah didn't sleep that night. She lay awake on a wooden bed, listening to the chirping crickets beyond the windowsill, thinking of every man she had ever met. None of them had been kings, and she had never truly been a queen. She had only played the part. The next morning, she asked to stay longer, not to explore or sightsee, but to learn how to garden. She wanted to know what it felt like to plant something that mattered not just in the soil, but in herself. She started waking up early. She watered rows with Elijah, pulled weeds, trimmed flowers. Her hands became calloused, her back ached. But each morning when the sunlight poured across the garden, she felt something bloom inside her, slowly, gently, but undeniably real. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she didn't need to know. By the 3rd week, autumn had crept in. The first leaves began to turn amber. Every morning, Savannah rose with the roosters, made coffee, and walked barefoot through dew-soaked grass. It was a rhythm of life she had never known before, quiet, steady, and so real it sometimes caught in her throat. Elijah never told her he loved her, but every time he brushed her hair aside while she knelt over the lavender bed, every time he refilled her glass in the midday sun, every time he saved her dinner in the oven when she came in late from the field, his love was louder than any words could be. Savannah was no longer the city woman. She no longer wore makeup. She no longer chased approval. And though the scars inside her still remained, she had begun to understand something true. No one really knows who they are until everything they once took pride in is gone. But the past, like any ghost that's ever been denied, always finds a way back. One morning while in town buying seeds with Marcus, Savannah ran into Veronica, a former colleague from the boutique in Manhattan. Veronica's eyes widened, The moment she saw her Savannah, with her hair tied in a loose bun, wearing a rough cotton shirt and old canvas shoes. "Oh my God, Savannah Cole, I thought you were off living it up in the Maldives." The words hit Savannah like a slap back into reality. For a split second, she wanted to turn and walk away, but instead she simply nodded. Veronica jumped right into catching up. She was organizing a major fashion event in Manhattan set to feature top names and serious investors. But more than that, she was looking for a face to represent her new brand. And no one fit better than Savannah, the former influencer with thousands of followers, that signature polished style, and most importantly, a backstory people would eat up. "You just have to come back. Be the old you again. I'll handle everything." Later, Savannah sat silently at a small cafe near the town square. Veronica was long gone, but her words lingered like perfume. Savannah looked down at her hands, dirt still caught in her cuticles, nails bare and chipped. Her eyes burned. Once she would have dreamed of being called back like that. A second chance to step back into the bright, curated world of fashion and acclaim. But now, she wasn't so sure. She didn't tell Elijah about the encounter, but all afternoon she struggled to focus. The flowers she'd planted just days ago seemed to watch her as she worked their petals tilted like questions. "Are you really going to leave us that evening?" Elijah gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded. But that night sleep didn't come. Two roads stretched clearly in her mind. One led to bright lights, fame, and admiration. The other was a dirt path where mornings began with roosters and love came with no guarantees. She remembered Marcus's words that first night in Rhinebeck. "If you want to be a queen, learn to treat your husband like a king, even if he wears no crown." Savannah had never learned that. She only knew how to take the crown from someone else. 2 days later, before sunrise, Savannah boarded a bus back to the city. She left no note. Not a single text for Elijah. Only a pair of worn gardening gloves resting on the windowsill and the flannel shirt he'd lent her during those early crisp mornings. New York welcomed her as if nothing had ever happened. The glass towers still shimmered. The stores still pulsed with bass-heavy music. People still moved as though no one ever stumbled. Veronica kept her word. She arranged a temporary apartment, booked stylists and makeup artists, and scheduled a photo shoot for Savannah's official comeback. They called it the triumphant return of Savannah Cole. Savannah stared at herself in the mirror. Her face was perfectly contoured. Her hair curled into effortless waves. The black satin dress clung to her figure like something straight out of a fashion spread. She was beautiful, at least in the way the city defined it. But her eyes were empty. Beneath the layers of makeup, there was no trace of the old Savannah. Not the one from the city. Not the one from the garden. Just a quiet stillness like a painting missing its most important detail. A few days later, while walking through a park near Union Square, Savannah noticed a small child holding a potted plant. The plant's stem had snapped, soil had spilled. The child's mother rushed and, visibly frustrated, pulled the child away, leaving the pot to tumble onto the concrete. Savannah bent down, picked up the plant, and stared at the broken tip. In that fragile moment, Elijah's face appeared in her mind with aching clarity, his gentle hands, his quiet eyes, the way he would bend over a flower, as if listening to it breathe. And she knew without a doubt she couldn't stay in this world. That night, Savannah skipped the scheduled photo shoot. She checked out of her hotel. She booked a night bus back to Rhinebeck. She didn't know if Elijah would be there. She didn't know if she even deserved another chance. But one thing was certain. This time she wasn't going back to be loved. She was going back to learn how to love. When the bus stopped in town, the sky was still dark. Savannah stepped off with a single small bag, her eyes red from a sleepless night. As she neared the farm, she saw the gate open, just as it always had been. And there, standing among the rows of newly planted flowers, watering them in the stillness of dawn, was Elijah. He didn't look up at first, but when she softly spoke his name, he turned. His eyes held surprise. And something else, something like pain, and something even softer. She stepped forward and placed her hand, those same hands that had once lost everything, on top of his. "I'm sorry for leaving without saying anything." Elijah said nothing, but he nodded, and in that quiet nod Savannah saw the one thing she had been searching for all along: a second chance. Not for a career, but for a heart. The next morning, the skies above Rhinebeck lit up in a golden-orange blaze, the kind of light that only exists where city smog cannot reach. Savannah woke on the creaky wooden chair outside Elijah's home, wind brushing through her messy hair. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was trying to become someone. Elijah was still quiet. He didn't ask why she had returned. He didn't mention the city. He simply handed her a cup of herbal tea, just like he always had, as if nothing had ever broken. And maybe with people who love with their hearts instead of their expectations, cracks don't need to be explained, they just need to be tended slowly, like soil. In the weeks that followed, Savannah stayed on the farm. She was no longer a guest, no longer an observer. She became part of it, like the daisies that grew by the wall, like the gardening gloves hanging beside the wooden door, like the soft laugh she let out whenever Elijah showed her how to use a rake without toppling over the water bucket. She didn't go back to the city. Veronica called a few times, sent messages saying the contract was still open, that Savannah could return to showbiz any time. Savannah read them, then deleted them. She didn't need to go back to being anyone, because for the first time, she already was. There was no grand confession between her and Elijah, no fireworks, no dramatic music, no diamond ring. Just one overcast afternoon, the two of them sitting side by side on a boulder overlooking the lake, when Elijah handed her a small clay pot inside a tiny citrus sprout had just begun to break through the soil. "We could plant this," he said softly, his eyes filled with hope, not expectation, "and see if it survives the winter." Savannah nodded, and that was how they began their life together, not with promises, but by planting something real. Life on the farm wasn't easy. Winter came early. Many plants withered from the frost. One week, rain poured non-stop, drowning the flower beds. Another week, their biggest local order for the county fair was canceled at the last minute due to a lack of hands. But Savannah didn't leave. She learned how to make compost, how to negotiate with small-town shop owners, how to rise at 5 a.m. to be ready for the Saturday farmers market. And every day Elijah watched a woman who once lived under stage lights, now covered in soil and sweat, yet shining brighter than ever. A year later, the garden they built together was in full bloom. Not just flowers, but rows of organic vegetables, fruit trees, herbs. Elijah suggested they sell hand-cut, hand-wrapped bouquets at the weekend market. Savannah used her fashion background to design labels, wrap paper, and create branding, simple, honest words that spoke from the dirt up. They weren't rich, but they were making a living and living it right. One autumn afternoon, Marcus, Elijah's father, sat on the porch reading. He turned to Savannah and said gently, "You've learned how to be a queen, not because you wear a crown, but because you finally know where to place your heart." Savannah didn't respond, but she smiled, the kind of quiet content smile she had once only seen on Elijah's face, now resting softly on her own. That night she sat alone in the small room they had turned into her writing space. She didn't write to post. She wrote to remember, a story about a girl who once believed love was measured in carats, who walked into a city searching for a man rich enough to rescue her. But it was only when she lost everything: status, image, the glittering dinner invites, that she met the one man who asked for nothing from her except her presence, her truth. And that's when real love began. Savannah never needed a fairy tale. She had lived her own modern version, where the prince didn't ride in on a white horse but in an old pickup truck, where the kingdom wasn't a castle but a garden, and where happiness wasn't a grand wedding dress but a pair of dirt-stained gloves and an old wool sweater worn in the first spring after a long, hard winter.